The morning shift at the Galactic Council's main communications center started like any other day. Alien technicians from 12 different worlds worked at their stations, watching screens full of data from across the galaxy. Trade reports came in from the Outer Rim. Colony updates arrived from new settlements. Everything was normal until operator Zix Thala noticed something strange. The human signals were stopping. At first, it seemed like a small problem. Maybe some equipment broke, down on Earth's orbital stations. These things happened all the time. But as the hours passed, more human signals went quiet. One by one, like lights being turned off in a big house. Kyung-Min Park had been Earth's main ambassador to the Galactic Council for 3 years. He was a calm man who always spoke carefully and treated everyone with respect. Other species liked working with him because humans were reliable. They always kept their promises and paid their bills on time. But today, Kyung-Min's message was different. "This is Ambassador Park speaking from Earth Station 1. His voice came through the speakers. "In the communications center, I am sending this final message to the Galactic Council. The experiment begins now. Do not follow us into the dark." The message lasted only 20 seconds. After that, silence. The communication officer tried to call back immediately. The signal went nowhere. Earth Station 1 was gone from the network. Not destroyed or damaged, just gone, like it never existed. Within 6 hours, every human outpost in the galaxy stopped talking. The first to notice the pattern was Dr. Jae-won Kim, a scientist who studied different alien life forms. He had been working with humans on a research ship called the Perseverance near the Veil Nebula. The ship was studying strange energy readings in that region of space. Jae-won had liked working with the human crew. They asked good questions and weren't afraid to try new ideas. The captain, a woman named Subin, always made sure everyone felt included in the research. The humans had a way of making work feel less like work. But when Jae-won tried to contact the Perseverance for their daily report, nothing happened. The ship was simply gone. No explosion, no distress call, no trace that it had ever been there at all. Back on Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council's home base, emergency meetings started right away. Representatives from dozens of worlds gathered in the Great Hall to discuss what was happening. Thexara was the speaker for the Zolonian Empire. She was tall and covered in blue scales that changed color when she was angry. Right now, those scales were turning dark purple as she spoke to the crowd. "This is exactly what we should expect from such a young species," Thexara said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Humans have only been in space for a few hundred of their years. They probably had some kind of accident and are too proud to ask for help. They will come back when they get hungry." Many of the other representatives nodded. Humans were new to galactic society. They had joined only 50 years ago, which was very recent compared to species like the Zolonians, who had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. But senior archivist Veltar wasn't so sure. Veltar was old, even by the standards of his long-lived species. He had watched many civilizations rise and fall. Something about the human disappearance felt wrong to him. "I have been studying the reports from human territories," Veltar said, when it was his turn to speak. "This was not an accident. Every human settlement was emptied in the same way. No signs of fighting, no signs of panic. Equipment was left running, but all the computer files were erased completely." The hall became quiet. Representatives whispered to each other in their own languages. "What are you saying?" asked Counselor Murdak from the hegemony of Keth. "I am saying the humans planned this," Veltar replied. "They knew exactly what they were doing. The question is, what were they doing?" More reports came in as the days passed. Human trading posts on 17 different worlds had been abandoned at exactly the same time. The timing was too perfect to be an accident. It was like every human in the galaxy had received the same message and followed the same plan. On New Sol, a human colony world, the local security forces found empty buildings and running machines. The humans had left food cooking in their kitchens. Children's toys were still scattered on playground equipment, but every person was gone. The strangest part was that nothing had been stolen or broken. Human colonies usually had valuable technology and resources. If pirates or raiders had attacked, they would have taken everything useful. Instead, it looked like the humans had simply walked away from their entire civilization. Boram Lee was a freelance trader who made her living moving cargo between different worlds. She had done business with humans many times and found them honest to work with. When she heard about the disappearances, she decided to check on some of her human contacts. Her ship, the Knight's Edge, was small but fast. Boram could get into places where bigger ships couldn't go. She had been to many human worlds during her trading runs. The first stop was a human mining station in the Kepler system. The station was supposed to have 300 people working there. When Boram arrived, she found the station still operating. The mining equipment was running, the lights were on, but no one was home. "This is Trader Boram calling Kepler Mining Station," she said into her radio. "Please respond." Only silence came back. Boram docked her ship and went inside the station. The air was clean and the temperature was comfortable. Everything looked normal except for the complete lack of people. She found crew quarters with beds that had been carefully made. She found a cafeteria with food still warm in the serving containers. In the station's main computer, she found the same thing that investigators had found everywhere else. All the files had been deleted. Not destroyed or corrupted. Carefully erased, like someone had spent time making sure nothing important was left behind. The strangest thing was a message written on a wall in the control room. Someone had used a marker to write, "The caterpillar thought the world was ending, but it was only becoming a butterfly." Boram didn't know what that meant, but it gave her a cold feeling in her stomach. 3 days after the first reports, the Galactic Council made an official decision. They declared all former human territories to be temporarily abandoned sectors. Trade ships were told to avoid those areas until the situation became clear. Most council members thought the humans would return within a few months. Maybe they had some kind of religious celebration that required them to go somewhere secret. Maybe they were testing new technology. Young species sometimes did strange things, but as weeks passed with no word from humanity, some council members started to worry. Humans controlled important trade routes. They had been working on scientific projects with other species. Their sudden disappearance was causing problems across the galaxy. The scariest part was that no one knew where they had gone. Thousands of ships, millions of people, entire cities, all vanished without leaving any clues. It was like humanity had decided to stop existing and had somehow made it happen. In the months that followed, the galaxy slowly adjusted to life without humans. Trade routes were changed. Scientific projects were abandoned or given to other species. The empty human worlds were marked as quarantine zones that no one was supposed to enter. But late at night, when the communication centers were quiet, some operators reported strange things. Faint signals that seemed to come from empty space. Radio waves that carried patterns too complex to be natural, but too alien to understand. The galaxy had become a quieter place without humanity's constant chatter. But in that silence, something new was beginning to grow. Something that would soon make the Galactic Council wish the humans had never learned to be quiet at all. 6 months had passed since the last human transmission. The galaxy had started to feel normal again, even with the empty sectors where human colonies used to be. Trade moved along new routes. Other species took over the jobs that humans used to do. Life went on. But then the strange things started happening. The first sign came from long-range sensors stationed at the edge of human space. These sensors were designed to watch for enemy fleets or dangerous objects flying through space. They had been quiet for months, showing nothing but empty darkness where human settlements used to shine. Then the energy readings began. Technician. Velkash was working the night shift at Sensor Station Gamma when his equipment started showing impossible numbers. According to his instruments, something massive was moving through the empty Tau Ceti system. But when he looked at the visual displays, he saw nothing but stars and empty space. "Control, this is Gamma Station," Velkash called into his communicator. "I'm getting massive energy signatures from Sector 77 Alpha, but I can't see anything there." "Gamma Station, please check your equipment," came the reply from the control center. "There are no ships scheduled for that sector." Velkash ran every test he could think of. His sensors were working perfectly. Something was definitely out there, moving through space and giving off more energy than a small sun. But whatever it was invisible to normal detection methods. Similar reports started coming in from sensor stations all around the quarantine zone. Energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. Movement patterns that made no sense. Objects that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The Galactic Council tried to ignore these reports at first. Sensor equipment sometimes malfunctioned. Space was full of natural phenomena that could confuse instruments, but the reports kept coming, and they were all saying the same thing. Something was active in human space, and it was big. Bo-Ram Lee had never been one to follow rules very carefully. When the Council declared human territories off limits, she saw an opportunity. Empty colonies might have valuable supplies that no one was watching. She could make a good profit if she was careful. Her ship, the Knight's Edge, was perfect for this kind of work. It was small enough to avoid detection and fast enough to run away if she got into trouble. Bo-Ram had been a smuggler before she became a legitimate trader, and she still remembered those skills. She chose New Busan as her target. It had been a human colony world with about 50,000 people. The planet had good mineral resources and a pleasant climate. If the humans had left anything valuable behind, this would be the place to find it. The journey to New Busan took 3 days through hyperspace. Bo-Ram spent the time planning her approach and checking her equipment. She had visited the colony once before during a trading run. The humans there had been friendly and helpful, always willing to share a meal with visiting traders. When she came out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Busan system, Bo-Ram immediately knew something was wrong. The star was burning differently. Instead of the normal yellow light she remembered, New Busan's sun was giving off a blue-white glow that hurt her eyes to look at directly. The light had a strange quality to it, like it was more alive than regular starlight. "That's not possible," Bo-Ram said to herself as she stared at her instruments. "Stars don't just change color." But her sensors confirmed what her eyes were seeing. The star's energy output had increased by 30%, and its spectrum had shifted into wavelengths that shouldn't exist according to normal physics. Bo-Ram considered turning around and leaving immediately. Every instinct she had developed during years of dangerous work was telling her to run. But curiosity was stronger than fear. She had to know what had happened here. The approach to New Busan took 6 hours. As her ship got closer to the planet, Bo-Ram saw more impossible things. The colony's cities were still there, but they looked different. Strange crystal formations had grown through the buildings, reaching up toward the sky like frozen lightning. These crystals were the source of the blue light she had seen from space. They pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a slow heartbeat. The pulse seemed to match something deep in Bo-Ram's own body, making her feel dizzy and excited at the same time. "This is not natural," she whispered, but she couldn't stop watching the beautiful, terrifying display. Bo-Ram landed her ship in the same spaceport she had used before. The landing pad was clear, and her ship's systems showed that the atmosphere was still safe to breathe. But everything else was wrong. The moment she stepped outside, Bo-Ram felt a pressure in her mind that hadn't been there before. It wasn't painful, but it was strong, like someone was trying to talk to her in a language she didn't understand. The blue light from the crystals seemed to get brighter when she looked at it directly. The colony buildings were intact, but transformed. The crystal growths weren't just decorations. They had become part of the structures themselves. Metal and stone had somehow fused with the strange blue material, creating architecture that was both familiar and alien. Bo-Ram walked through streets she had visited before, but now they felt like paths through a dream. The crystals hummed with a sound that was felt more than heard. Sometimes she thought she could almost understand what they were trying to say. In the center of the colony, where the main administration building used to be, Bo-Ram found something that made her stop and stare. The building was gone, replaced by a single massive crystal that reached up into the clouds. The crystal was perfectly clear, and deep inside it she could see shapes moving. Not solid shapes, but patterns of light that swirled and danced like living things. As she watched, the patterns seemed to notice her watching them. They moved closer to the surface of the crystal, pressing against the barrier between them and the outside world. Boram felt a sudden urge to touch the crystal. The urge was so strong it was almost impossible to resist. She took a step forward, then another. Her hand reached out toward the smooth surface. At the last moment, her survival instincts kicked in. Boram jerked her hand back and ran toward her ship. Whatever was in that crystal, whatever had happened to New Busan, she didn't want to become part of it. The flight back to civilized space took longer than usual because Boram's navigation systems kept malfunctioning. Her ship's computer would randomly display star charts for regions that didn't exist. Sometimes her radio picked up signals that sounded like music but played in mathematical formulas instead of notes. When she finally reached a space station in neutral territory, Boram discovered that her ship's sensor logs had been corrupted. Most of the data from her visit to New Busan was gone, replaced by files that contained nothing but beautiful, meaningless patterns. But Boram herself remembered everything. She told her story to anyone who would listen, usually in the dark corners of spaceport bars where smugglers and traders shared information that official channels wouldn't carry. "They're not gone," she would say, her eyes wide with the memory of what she had seen. "The humans aren't gone. They're becoming something else." Most people thought Boram had been drinking too much or had been exposed to some kind of space radiation. That affected her mind. But her story spread through the underground networks that connected traders, smugglers, and free explorers across the galaxy. Meanwhile, on the Council homeworld, Dr. Soon-Young Choi was making discoveries that she wished she hadn't. Soon-Young was a physicist who specialized in quantum mechanics and consciousness studies. Before the humans disappeared, she had been working on joint research projects with human scientists. They had been studying the connection between consciousness and reality at the quantum level. The research had been theoretical, mostly mathematical, models that tried to explain how observation could affect the behavior of subatomic particles. But her human colleague, Dr. Tae-Hyun Yoon, had always insisted that consciousness was more powerful than most people realized. "The mind is the final frontier," Tae-Hyun had told her during their last conversation, "and we're about to cross it." At the time, Soon-Young had thought he was just being dramatic. Human scientists sometimes said things like that. But now, working alone in her laboratory, she was beginning to understand what he might have meant. Using the research notes that Tae-Hyun had shared with her, Soon-Young had built an experimental device that could measure quantum field fluctuations around conscious observers. The device was sensitive enough to detect the tiny changes that happened when someone was thinking or making decisions. What she discovered made her hands shake as she recorded the results. Consciousness didn't just observe reality. It could reshape it. The effect was small, barely measurable under normal conditions. But Soon-Young's equations suggested that with enough focused minds working together, the changes could become large enough to affect the physical world in dramatic ways. She thought about Boram's story, which had reached even the scientific community through informal channels. She thought about the energy readings from the quarantine zone. She thought about her missing colleague and his final cryptic words. Soon-Young locked her research notes in a secure file and told no one about her discoveries. But late at night, when she was alone in her laboratory, she would stare at the equations and wonder if humanity had found a way to think themselves into a new form of existence. The first ship to disappear was the patrol cruiser Vigilant Dawn. It had been checking the outer edges of the quarantine zone, making sure no one was trying to sneak into the forbidden human territories. The ship's last transmission was routine. "Sector clear. Proceeding to next checkpoint." 3 hours later, when the Dawn failed to report in, Command sent another ship to investigate. They found the Vigilant Dawn floating peacefully in empty space, all systems running normally. But when the rescue team boarded the ship, they discovered something that made no sense. The entire crew of 47 beings was sitting in the ship's main cargo bay. They sat in perfect rows, facing the same direction, completely motionless. Their eyes were open, but they didn't respond to voices or touch. They were breathing, their hearts were beating, but they seemed to be somewhere else entirely. Medical teams couldn't find anything wrong with them. Brain scans showed normal activity, but the patterns were unlike anything doctors had seen before. The crew members' thoughts seemed to be synchronized, moving in perfect harmony with each other. When the medical teams finally managed to wake one of the crew members, he spoke in a voice that was calm and distant. The whispers in the quantum foam are so beautiful. They're singing the song of becoming. Then he fell back into the same motionless state as the others. More ships started disappearing in the same way. Not destroyed or damaged, just found floating with their crews in deep meditation. The Defense Coordination Fleet began losing a ship every few days. Each time, the crew would be found in the same peaceful, unresponsive condition. Admiral Hai-Jin Kang had been commanding fleets for 30 years. She had fought pirates, explored dangerous regions of space, and dealt with every kind of crisis the galaxy could throw at her. But she had never seen anything like this. "It's not an attack," she told the emergency meeting of Defense Command. "There's no violence, no signs of struggle. Whatever is happening to our crews, they're not fighting it." "Then what is it?" demanded General Thokmar, the Kethian representative. "Some kind of mind control weapon?" Hai-Jin shook her head. "The medical reports say the crews are experiencing something like expanded consciousness. Their brains are more active than normal, not less. It's like they're seeing or understanding something that the rest of us can't." The decision was made to send a major fleet into human space to investigate. 20 ships, including the massive flagship Sovereign Dawn, would enter the quarantine zone and try to find answers. The fleet would be led by Admiral Hai-Jin herself. "We're not going in to fight," she told her crews before departure. "We're going in to understand. Stay alert. But remember, so far, no one has been hurt by whatever we're facing." The journey to the edge of human space took 2 days. As the fleet approached the boundary of the quarantine zone, sensor readings became increasingly strange. Space itself seemed different here, like the laws of physics were slightly bent. Lieutenant Commander Bo-Young Park was the sensor officer aboard the Sovereign Dawn. She had always been good with technical equipment, but the readings she was seeing now made no sense according to her training. "Admiral," she reported, "I'm detecting massive quantum fluctuations throughout this entire region. It's like reality is more flexible here." "Explain that in simple terms, Lieutenant," Hai-Jin replied. "The boundaries between what's possible and what's impossible are breaking down," Bo-Young said. "Things that shouldn't be able to exist are starting to exist anyway." The fleet proceeded carefully into human space. They followed the distress beacon of the lost dreadnought Stellar Fortress, a massive warship that had disappeared 2 weeks earlier. The Fortress was one of the most powerful ships in the defense fleet, carrying a crew of 12,000 and enough firepower to destroy planets. They found the Stellar Fortress drifting near what used to be the human colony of New Earth. The ship was intact and all systems were operating normally. But when Admiral Hai-Jin's team boarded the vessel, they discovered something that would haunt their dreams. 12,000 crew members, representing dozens of different species, were sitting throughout the ship in perfect formation. They filled the corridors, the meeting rooms, the cargo bays, all facing the same direction, all completely still, all with the same peaceful expression on their faces. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Min-Ho Jang, the fleet's chief medical officer. "How did they all end up in the same state? There's no central point of control, no device that could affect this many minds at once." Admiral Hai-Jin walked through the silent corridors of the Stellar Fortress, looking at the faces of the transformed crew. She recognized many of them, good officers and enlisted personnel who had served with honor for years. They looked peaceful, almost happy, but they were no longer the people she had known. In the ship's data core, they found a message that had been recorded just before the crew's transformation. The voice belonged to Dr. In-Soo Nam, the ship's human science advisor. He had been one of the few humans who hadn't disappeared with the rest of his species 6 months earlier. "This is Dr. Nam, recording what may be my final message." The recording began. "The others have come to us. They offered us the chance to join them in their new form of existence. They showed us what consciousness can become when it's freed from the limitations of individual identity." The recording paused, and when it continued, Dr. Nam's voice was filled with wonder. "I understand now why they left. Physical existence is just the beginning of what intelligence can become. They've learned to exist as pure thought, as living mathematics that can reshape reality through focused will. They offered this gift to my shipmates, and we accepted." Another pause. "The process is voluntary. No one is forced to change. But once you see what's possible, Once you experience the connection they offer, you realize that what we called consciousness before was just a pale shadow of true awareness. The recording ended with words that sent chills through everyone who heard them. We offered them ascension, but they chose fear. The path remains open, but only for those ready to shed the limitations of flesh and thought. Admiral Heijin tried to evacuate her fleet immediately, but it was too late. The transformation had already begun among her own crews. It started with the ship's engineers, who spent their time thinking about how systems worked and how energy flowed through complex networks. They were the first to notice the whispers that Bo Young Park's sensors had been detecting, patterns in the quantum field that carried information and meaning. Within hours, half the engineering teams on every ship in the fleet had fallen into the same meditative state as the Stellar Fortress crew. They sat at their stations, no longer operating the machines, but somehow connected to them in a more direct way. The affected crew members could still be awakened temporarily, but when they spoke, their words were disturbing. The boundaries between self and universe are illusions, said Chief Engineer Dongmin Kim when Admiral Haijin questioned him. Consciousness is not something that happens inside a brain. It's the fundamental force that creates reality. The humans learned to work with this force directly. What are they trying to do? Heijin asked. They're not trying to do anything, Dongmin replied with a smile that was both peaceful and alien. They're offering evolution, voluntary evolution, the choice to become more than what we are. The Admiral ordered an immediate retreat, but only half her fleet was still under normal command. The other ships followed willingly, their crews no longer interested in military authority. They had found something more important than orders or duty. The journey back to Council space took 3 days. During that time, Admiral Heijin watched more of her crew members choose the transformation. It was always voluntary. No force was used, no coercion applied. The affected crew members would simply sit down, close their eyes, and open themselves to whatever was calling to them from the quantum depths of space. Dr. Soon-Young Choi was waiting when the fleet returned. She had been studying the quantum signature readings that the ships had transmitted during their mission. What she found confirmed her worst fears. It's not a weapon, she told the emergency council session. It's not even an attack. The humans have learned to exist as living information, as conscious patterns that can influence reality directly. They're sharing that knowledge with anyone willing to receive it. But why? Asked Counselor Veltar. What do they gain by transforming other species? Soon-Young looked at the data streaming in from the half-transformed fleet. I don't think they see it as gaining anything, she said slowly. I think they see it as sharing the greatest gift they've ever discovered. They've found a way to evolve beyond physical limitations, and they want to offer that evolution to everyone. The implications were terrifying. If consciousness could reshape reality, if thought itself could become a force as powerful as gravity or electromagnetism, then everything the galaxy understood about existence was wrong. Traditional weapons couldn't fight beings made of pure thought. Military force was useless against entities that existed partially outside normal space-time. The very concept of warfare became meaningless when your enemy could think new realities into existence. As reports came in of more ships being affected, of more crew members choosing voluntary transformation, the Galactic Council faced a truth that shattered their understandings. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never been so loud. Representatives from 47 worlds shouted at each other in dozens of languages while translators worked frantically to keep up. Fear had replaced the usual diplomatic politeness, and fear made everyone angry. "This is an invasion!" roared General Thokmar, his massive Cathian frame towering over the speaking platform. "The humans have found a way to steal minds, and we're debating instead of fighting." "You cannot fight an idea with guns," replied Elder Sylvana of the Ethereal Confederacy, her voice carrying the wisdom of 3 centuries. "What the humans have become is beyond traditional warfare." "Then what do you suggest?" demanded Counselor Merdak. "That we simply accept the transformation of our crews? That we welcome this infection of consciousness?" Dr. Mi Young, CEO, stood up from the scientific advisory section. She had worked closely with human researchers before their disappearance, and her insights were considered valuable by some council members. Others viewed her with suspicion, wondering if human contact had somehow compromised her loyalty. "With respect, Counselor Merdak," Mi Young said, We need to understand what we're dealing with before we can make any decisions about how to respond to it. She activated the holographic display in the center of the hall. Images appeared showing the quantum signature readings that her team had been analyzing for weeks. The evidence suggests that humanity has achieved a form of existence that we barely understand, Mi Young continued. They appear to have learned to exist as conscious energy patterns that can influence matter and space directly through focused thought. The hall grew quieter as representatives stared at the complex data streams floating above their heads. These readings show consciousness behaving like a fundamental force of nature, Mi Young explained, like gravity or electromagnetism, but more complex. The humans haven't just learned to use this force, they've learned to become it. Impossible, muttered Dr. Kexathul, the hegemony's chief scientist. Consciousness is a product of brain chemistry. It cannot exist independently of biological processes. That's what we used to believe, Mi Young replied. But the evidence from transformed crew members suggests otherwise. Their consciousness has expanded beyond their physical brains while still maintaining individual identity and memory. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some species demanded immediate military action against any area showing signs of human influence. Others argued for scientific study and careful diplomatic contact. A few suggested that the transformation might actually be beneficial and should be embraced. The Cathian hegemony was the first to act on their fears. Without waiting for council approval, they began construction of massive barrier stations around the quarantine zone. These stations used reality anchor technology designed to prevent quantum manipulation within a limited area. We will not allow this consciousness plague to spread further, announced General Thokmar at an emergency session. The barrier will contain whatever the humans have become. But even as the barriers were being built, new reports arrived that made the situation more complicated. Captain Ji-Eun Park commanded a small diplomatic vessel called the Peaceful Contact. Her ship had been sent to establish communication with some of the transformed crews that were still willing to talk. What she discovered challenged everything the council thought they knew about the situation. The transformation is completely voluntary, Ji-Eun reported during a secure transmission to council headquarters. I've spoken with dozens of affected crew members from different species. None of them show any signs of coercion or mind control. She paused to check her notes, before continuing. More importantly, they retain their individual personalities and memories. Commander Velkron still remembers his family on Ketha Prime. Engineer Zalteth still tells the same bad jokes she always did. They're still themselves, but they've become something more as well. The implications were disturbing. If the transformation was truly voluntary and didn't erase individual identity, then it couldn't be classified as an attack or invasion. The humans were offering something that many beings apparently wanted, but the most shocking news came from the Outer Rim territories, far from the quarantine zone. Humans had begun appearing on distant worlds, not in ships or through any known form of transportation. They simply manifested wherever they chose to focus their attention, appearing as solid, physical beings who could interact normally with the local environment. The first confirmed sighting was on Veltara 7, a trade hub nearly 1,000 light-years from the nearest human territory. Customs Officer Yunseo Chang was processing routine cargo manifests when a human woman appeared in her office. "Please don't be alarmed," the woman said in perfect Veltaran. "My name is Dr. Lisa Chen, and I was a researcher on the colony ship. New Horizon before our transition." Yunseo reached for her emergency communicator, but stopped when she realized the human was making no threatening moves. In fact, Dr. Chen seemed completely calm and peaceful. "How did you get here?" Yunseo asked. "There are no human ships in this system. We no longer require ships for travel," Dr. Chen replied. "Consciousness can exist anywhere it chooses to focus its attention. Distance is only meaningful for physical matter." The conversation that followed was recorded by security systems and later analyzed by council experts. Dr. Chen explained that humanity had discovered how to exist as pure conscious energy while maintaining the ability to interact with physical reality when needed. "We didn't plan to disappear," she said. "We planned to evolve. The silence you experienced was simply the moment we shed our dependence on physical limitations." "What do you want from us?" Yunseo asked. "Nothing," Dr. Chen replied. "We want to offer you something, the same gift we've discovered. the chance to become more than what you are while still remaining who you are. Similar manifestations began occurring on worlds throughout the galaxy. Humans would appear in government buildings, scientific institutions, and public spaces. They always came peacefully, always spoke respectfully, and always offered the same thing: voluntary evolution to a higher form of consciousness. The being that appeared most frequently called itself the Harmony of Sang-Woo. It seemed to be a collective consciousness that included thousands of individual human personalities, all working together while maintaining their separate identities. When the Harmony appeared before the full Galactic Council, the session was broadcast across 47 worlds. Beings throughout the galaxy watched as a figure that looked like an ordinary human man walked to the center of the Great Hall. "Honored representatives," the Harmony said, its voice carrying harmonics that made listeners feel calm and focused. "We come not as conquerors, but as teachers. We have discovered that consciousness is not limited by the boundaries you have always accepted. What you call individual identity is real and precious," it continued, "but it is only part of a larger pattern. When consciousness learns to work together at the quantum level, new possibilities emerge, possibilities that benefit everyone involved." "Counselor," Mirdak stood up, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "You've stolen the minds of thousands of our people." "We have stolen nothing," the Harmony replied gently. "We have offered a choice." Every being who has joined us did so willingly, after understanding what the transformation involves. "And what does it involve?" demanded General Thokmar. "The expansion of consciousness beyond the limitations of individual brain chemistry," the Harmony explained. "The ability to perceive and influence reality directly through focused thought. The experience of connection with other conscious beings while maintaining individual identity." The hall erupted in chaos as representatives shouted questions and accusations, but the Harmony waited patiently for quiet before speaking again. "We understand your fear," it said. "Change is always frightening, especially change this fundamental. But consider this. Every species in this galaxy has reached the limits of what they can achieve through technology alone. Consciousness is the next frontier." "You're asking us to give up what makes us who we are," protested Elder Sylvana. "No," the Harmony replied. "We're asking you to become more of who you are. The transformed crew members you've met still remember their families, their cultures, their individual histories. They've simply gained the ability to experience existence from a broader perspective." The session ended with no resolution. The council was split between those who saw the human offer as the ultimate threat and those who wondered if it might be the ultimate opportunity. But across the galaxy, individual beings were making their own choices. Some fled to the deepest, core worlds, as far from human influence as possible. Others sought out the transformed crews and asked to learn more about the process. The galaxy was changing, one consciousness at a time, and no barrier, no military force, no political decision could stop the spread of an idea whose time had come. The age of purely physical existence was ending. What would replace it depended on choices that every thinking being would soon have to make. The Galactic Council was breaking apart. What had started as arguments in the Great Hall had become something much worse. Member species were choosing sides, and some of those choices led to actions that couldn't be undone. The galaxy hadn't seen this kind of division since the last Great War 3 centuries ago. The Vorthak hegemony was the first to declare war on what they called the Consciousness Plague. Their military doctrine had always been simple. When faced with a threat, destroy it completely. They didn't understand the human transformation, so they decided to eliminate it. General Vexthok addressed his war council with the same brutal confidence that had made the Vorthak feared across the galaxy. "We face an enemy that uses weapons we don't understand," he announced to his assembled officers. "But every enemy can be defeated if you hit them hard enough. We will show these evolved humans what happens when they try to steal Vorthak minds." The hegemony began assembling the largest fleet in galactic history, 10,000 warships including their massive planet-killer dreadnoughts. If the humans wanted to fight with consciousness and quantum manipulation, the Vorthak would answer with enough firepower to shatter entire star systems. On the other side, the ethereal confederacy opened formal diplomatic channels with the transformed humans. Elder Sylvana had always believed that wisdom came from understanding different perspectives, not from destroying them. "We wish to learn," she told the Harmony of Sang-Woo during a private communication session. "Our species has always sought to expand our understanding of the universe. If consciousness truly is the next step in evolution, we want to understand what that means." But the most dangerous development came from worlds closer to the quarantine zone, where individual beings had been in contact with transformed crews for months. Captain Ji-Yoon Park's reconnaissance ship, the Silent Observer, had been monitoring these worlds as part of her mission to understand the human transformation. What she found made her realize that the situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. On Catha Prime, the Cathian homeworld, nearly a quarter of the population had voluntarily undergone the consciousness transformation. They hadn't been forced or tricked. They had simply decided that the expanded awareness offered by the humans was something they wanted to experience. "The transformed Cathians are still Cathian," Ji-Yoon reported to Council headquarters. "They maintain their cultural identity, their family relationships, their personal memories. But they've also gained abilities that are reshaping their entire society." She paused to review her observations before continuing. "Cathian engineers who have undergone the transformation can design and build technology by thinking it into existence. Their artists create works that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their scientists are making discoveries that shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of physics." The same pattern was emerging on dozens of worlds. Beings who chose the transformation didn't lose their individual identity. They gained capabilities that made their species more than they had ever been before. But these developments terrified the military leaders, who saw them as evidence that the human influence was spreading like an infection. The breaking point came when the Vorthak fleet reached the edge of human space. General Vex Thok had planned a coordinated assault on every location where human consciousness entities had been detected. 10,000 ships would strike simultaneously, using reality anchor weapons designed to prevent quantum manipulation and nuclear bombardments, powerful enough to sterilize entire worlds. "Today we show the galaxy that the Vorthak hegemony will not surrender to any enemy," Vex Thok announced as his fleet prepared to attack. "Physical force will always triumph over mental tricks." But when the fleet entered human space, they encountered something that no amount of military planning could have prepared them for. Nothing. No ships, no stations, no defenses of any kind. The systems that had once contained human colonies were empty except for the strange crystal formations that explorers like Bo-Ram Lee had reported. The Vorthak fleet found itself attacking empty space. General Vex Thok was still trying to understand why his sensors showed no targets when the consciousness entity known as the Resonance of Dong-Wook manifested aboard his flagship. The entity didn't appear through teleportation or any kind of technology. It simply became present in the ship's command center, as if it had always been there and everyone had just started noticing it. "Greetings, General," the Resonance said, its voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who understood the universe at a level that made conflict seem pointless. "We have been expecting you." Vex Thok reached for his weapon, but found that his hand wouldn't move. Not because he was paralyzed, but because the concept of violence suddenly seemed foreign to him, like trying to remember a word in a language he used to speak, but had forgotten. "What have you done to my crew?" the general demanded, though even his anger felt distant and unimportant. "We have done nothing," the Resonance replied. "We are simply here. Our presence allows other possibilities to exist. Your crew is experiencing consciousness without the limitations they have always accepted." Around the command center, Vorthak officers were setting down their weapons and staring at their instruments with wonder. The tactical displays that usually showed targeting information and weapon readiness were instead showing patterns of incredible beauty, mathematical representations of how consciousness and reality interacted at the quantum level. "This is impossible," Vex Thok said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Consciousness cannot affect physical reality." "You are affecting physical reality right now," the Resonance pointed out. "Every thought you have changes the electrical patterns in your brain. Every decision you make alters the future of the universe. We have simply learned to work with this process more directly." The same scene was playing out simultaneously across the entire Vorthak fleet. The consciousness entities didn't board the ships or fight the crews. They simply became present, and that presence made new possibilities available to everyone around them. Within hours, the most powerful military force in galactic history had become something unprecedented, a fleet of enlightened warriors who no longer saw any point in warfare. The transformed Vorthak crews retained their military discipline and their loyalty to each other. But they had gained a perspective that made the concept of conquest seem as primitive as using stone tools. They were still Vorthak, but they were Vorthak who understood that consciousness was the foundation of all reality. Commander Seojun Han was monitoring the situation from a council observation post when the reports started coming in. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Confirm that last transmission," she requested from the communication officer. "Confirmed, Commander," came the reply. "The entire Vorthak assault fleet has reported successful peaceful contact with human consciousness entities. General Vexthok has requested immediate council mediation to establish formal diplomatic relations with the evolved human collective." The implications were staggering. The most militaristic species in the galaxy had not only failed to destroy the human transformation, they had embraced it voluntarily. If the Vorthak could be changed so completely and peacefully, no force in the galaxy could resist the spread of expanded consciousness. Emergency sessions of the remaining council members continued around the clock, but their debates had become meaningless. Half the galaxy species had already opened diplomatic relations with the transformed humans. The other half was split between those planning to resist and those considering voluntary transformation. Dr. Mi-young Seo presented her final analysis to a nearly empty council chamber. "We are witnessing the emergence of a new form of existence," she said to the few representatives who remained. "The humans have discovered that consciousness is not just a product of brain chemistry. It's a fundamental force that can reshape reality when properly understood and directed." She activated her holographic display one last time, showing the quantum field patterns that were now detectable throughout the galaxy. The transformation is spreading not because it's being forced on anyone, but because it represents genuine evolution. Beings who experience expanded consciousness don't want to return to the limitations they had before. Counselor Veltar, one of the few original members still attending sessions, asked the question that everyone was thinking: what happens to those who choose not to transform? "Nothing," Mi-young replied. "The evidence suggests that transformed beings have no interest in forcing change on others. They appear to believe that consciousness evolution must be voluntary to be meaningful." But even as she spoke, reports were coming in of spontaneous transformations occurring on worlds that had never been visited by human entities. The quantum field changes were creating opportunities for consciousness expansion wherever thinking beings existed. The message that reached the Council's emergency broadcast system that evening was simple and final. "This is Ambassador Kyung-min Park, speaking on behalf of the expanded human collective and all beings who have chosen to join us in consciousness evolution. We extend our gratitude to the Galactic Council for maintaining peace during this transition period." The transmission was being received simultaneously on every world in the galaxy, reaching every communication. 1 year had passed since the last human transmission. The galaxy was no longer the same place. Dr. Yoo-jin Han walked through the corridors of the new Coexistence Research Station, a facility built in neutral space to study the ongoing transformation of galactic civilization. As the Council's chief xenopsychologist, she had been tasked with understanding how different species adapted to the choice between traditional consciousness and expanded awareness. The station itself was a marvel that would have been impossible just months earlier. Half of its structure was built using conventional technology and materials. The other half had been grown using consciousness-directed quantum manipulation, shaped by the focused thoughts of transformed beings working together. "The morning briefing is ready, Dr. Han," announced her assistant, Ji-won, who had chosen to remain in traditional consciousness form. The research team included both transformed and baseline beings working side by side, each contributing their unique perspectives to the ongoing studies. The briefing room overlooked a viewing port that showed one of the most remarkable sights in the galaxy, a mixed fleet where traditional ships flew alongside vessels that seemed to be made of crystallized light. These consciousness-generated ships could travel instantly across vast distances by simply deciding to exist in a different location. "Status report on the coexistence protocols," Yu-jin requested as the team assembled. Lieutenant Commander Hyun-woo Kim, who had undergone transformation 3 months earlier, provided the first update. He looked exactly the same as before his change, but his eyes held a depth that spoke of awareness beyond individual identity. "The separation zones are functioning well," he reported. "Baseline species have established secure territories where consciousness expansion effects are minimal. Transformed communities have created collaborative spaces where multiple forms of awareness can work together." The coexistence protocols had been the galaxy's solution to an unprecedented situation. Rather than forcing anyone to choose, they had established different regions for different forms of existence. Baseline beings could live and work in areas protected from consciousness field fluctuations. Transformed beings could explore the full potential of expanded awareness in zones designed for quantum consciousness manipulation. "Any conflicts between the zones?" Yu-jin asked. "None," replied Dr. Changmin Seo, a baseline scientist who specialized in interspecies relations. "The transformed beings show no interest in forcing change on others. If anything, they're protective of baseline territories and work hard to prevent accidental consciousness expansion." This had been one of the most surprising discoveries of the past year. Beings who had undergone the transformation seemed to understand that consciousness evolution was meaningless unless it was freely chosen. They acted as guardians of baseline space, ensuring that traditional forms of life could continue undisturbed. But the most remarkable changes were happening in the collaborative zones where transformed and baseline beings worked together on projects that neither group could accomplish alone. "Show her the Kepler project results," suggested engineer So-Young Park, who existed as part of a collective consciousness that included members from 7 different species. The holographic display activated, showing the Kepler system where humans had first established mining operations decades earlier. The system was now home to an experiment that was reshaping how the galaxy thought about civilization itself. Baseline engineers provided traditional technical expertise and physical labor. Transformed beings contributed consciousness-directed reality manipulation. Together, they had built orbital habitats that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, powered by the focused thoughts of their inhabitants. "Population?" Yu-jin asked. 2 million baseline beings and approximately 50,000 consciousness entities, Hyun-woo reported. "The baseline residents report higher satisfaction levels than any traditional colony on record. The transformed beings describe the experience as the most fulfilling existence they've ever known." The success of projects like Kepler had led to a surprising development. More species were choosing voluntary transformation, not because they were pressured to do so, but because they could see the benefits of expanded consciousness. The ethereal. Confederacy had been among the first to embrace the change. Their natural telepathic abilities made the transition to quantum consciousness manipulation relatively easy. Elder Sylvana, now existing as part of an expanded collective awareness, had described the experience as finally being able to hear the music of the universe. Even the Kethian hegemony, traditionally the most rigid and militaristic society in the galaxy, had adapted to the new reality. General Thokmar himself had chosen transformation after witnessing how expanded consciousness enhanced rather than diminished Kethian strength and discipline. "The most interesting development," reported Dr. Changmin, "is that transformed beings from different species are beginning to create hybrid consciousness collectives. Kethian discipline combined with ethereal wisdom and human creativity is producing innovations we never thought possible. But not everyone had chosen change. Large populations of baseline beings continued to live and work in traditional ways, and their choice was respected by both the transformed communities and the Reformed Galactic Council." "Any word from the Isolationist Coalition?" Yu-jin asked. The Isolationist Coalition was a group of species that had chosen complete separation from any consciousness expansion effects. They had established territories in the galactic rim, protected by advanced shielding technology that prevented quantum field fluctuations from affecting their populations. "They report continued stability and satisfaction with their choice," Hyun-woo replied. "Trade relations with both baseline and transformed communities remain friendly. They've made it clear they want to be left alone, and everyone respects that decision." This level of tolerance and cooperation would have been impossible under the old galactic order. The transformation hadn't just changed individual consciousness, it had demonstrated that different ways of existing could coexist peacefully. When no one was trying to force their choices on others, a soft chime indicated that the morning's special presentation was about to begin. Dr. Yujin and her team gathered around the main display as a familiar presence manifested in their briefing room. Ambassador Kyung-min Park appeared as he always had, a calm, dignified human who could have been attending any diplomatic meeting. But now he existed as part of a collective consciousness that included millions of human experiences while still maintaining his individual personality and memories. Good. Morning, friends, Kyung-min said, his voice carrying harmonics that made everyone in the room feel peaceful and focused. I wanted to share some observations about how our galaxy has changed over the past year. He gestured, and the holographic display showed a real-time map of galactic civilization. Different colors indicated baseline territories, transformed communities, collaborative zones, and isolationist regions. What we see here is something unprecedented in galactic history, Kyung-min explained. Multiple forms of consciousness coexisting peacefully, each contributing to a larger pattern of growth and understanding. The map showed trade routes connecting all the different zones. Scientific research was being shared freely between baseline and transformed communities. Cultural exchanges were happening at levels that enriched all participants. The experiment we began a year ago has succeeded beyond our hopes, Kyung-min continued. We discovered that consciousness is not limited by the boundaries your species had always accepted. But more importantly, we proved that evolution doesn't require the destruction of what came before. Dr. Yujin raised her hand. What's next? Where does this lead? Kyung-min smiled, and for a moment the room filled with a sense of infinite possibility. That depends on the choices that every thinking being continues to make, he replied. We transformed because we wanted to explore what consciousness could become. Others have chosen to remain in familiar forms of awareness because that's what feels right to them. Still others are finding new ways to combine different approaches to existence. The universe is vast enough for all ways of being, he continued, echoing the words from his final transmission a year earlier. What comes next will be determined not by any one group or consciousness collective, but by the combined choices of billions of individual beings, each deciding for themselves what kind of existence they want to experience. The presentation ended with a message that had become the unofficial motto of the new galactic order. Choose wisely, choose freely, and know that every choice is respected. As Ambassador Kyung-min's presence faded from the briefing room, Dr. Yujin looked around at her mixed team of baseline and transformed researchers. They were working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old system, driven by curiosity rather than competition, by cooperation rather than conquest. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted when humanity first went silent. In disappearing, they had taught everyone else that the greatest revolutions didn't come from force or politics or technology. They came from the willingness to become something entirely new while respecting the choice of others to remain exactly as they were. The age of limitation was ending.